Welcome back. All right, so I want to look at the whole expansion argument. I want to look at it from a different perspective. So, of course, there's a lot of talk about this isn't fair. Vegas and Seattle were good right out of the gate. Which, I mean, when we look at it from an expansion perspective, and I've done this before, I think that's a little bit simplistic. So I've got two boards for this video. This is different. So I'm going to go over just the basics of the expansion and what happened and compare it from then till now. And keep in mind that back before we had a salary cap, the situation was completely and totally different. So that's right off the bat what I want to mention. We had some owners that just didn't feel the need to spend money. They knew the building was going to be full no matter what kind of product they put on the ice. So why pay for more players? Why pay for better players? Why should I give that guy $5 million? I can just keep that $5 million. I know the fans are going to come anyways, so I don't really have to worry about it. So the first expansion I want to get into is the 1991 San Jose, Minnesota dispersal expansion draft. It's a weird one. So the California Golden Seals, or the Oakland Seals became the California Golden Seals. It just didn't work. They moved to Cleveland. Cleveland didn't work, so they merged Cleveland with the Minnesota North Stars, which also didn't really work. But eventually, the promise had been made to try California again at some point, and so the San Jose Sharks come in kind of as a replacement for the Golden Seals. So that's why, if you were wondering about why would the Sharks do a throwback to the Seals, yeah, there's sort of a direct lineage between the two. And so when the Minnesota North Stars watched San Jose come into existence, they also got a benefit from that in that there was a dispersal draft first, and then there was the expansion draft after. And Minnesota participated in the expansion draft as well. So San Jose took, I think I was reading, is 24 players from the Minnesota North Stars organization. So this was, some players, but there were prospects, there were unsigned guys, just everybody. From Minnesota, San Jose takes, for as example, Urbe, Zmolik, Link Gates was one of the ones as well. Archer Survey, of course, goes on to be a pretty good goaltender. In expansion, San Jose picks up Hackett and Pazlowski as examples, but not a great expansion list for San Jose. Minnesota, in the dispersal, they pick up Rob Ramage, they pick up Dave Babich, and they pick up Kelly Kissio as notables, right? So San Jose gets their team, and we know they're going to be bad. They were bad for 2 years, and then in the third round, they make it to the second round. So they became underdogs that were pretty dangerous in the playoffs. And so, yeah, fans were kind of excited about the Sharks. Remember, there was Sharks gear everywhere. And they were pretty good when it came playoff time when they made it there. And that was only in year 3. Tampa Bay and Ottawa then joined the league a year later. Ottawa went the younger route. The highlights for them, Peter Sidorkiewicz, a goaltender I liked. It didn't work out in Ottawa. Sylvain Turgeon, whose best days were behind him when he arrived in Ottawa. On the Tampa Bay side, they pick up notables Joe Ricci on the blue line, Sean Chambers on the blue line as well, and Brian Bradley up front. Bradley was excellent for them early on. They had 3 bad years. They didn't make it to the second round until year 11. They had good goaltending from guys like Darren Pupa and whatnot. Goaltending is key. When you're getting an expansion team, goaltending is key. Now, for Ottawa, they were bad for longer. 4 years they were bad. They made it to the second round in year 6. So how things start don't necessarily tell you how things are going to end. That's why with Seattle making the playoffs in the second year, it doesn't necessarily mean they're not going to have just as solid of a run as Vegas will once we get, 6 years down the road for them. Then a year later, Florida and Anaheim came in. So this is a league now that's, it's getting tougher and tougher to get really good players in expansion draft. But Florida and Anaheim really master class here. So Van Beesbrook and Fitzpatrick are picked up as the goaltenders for the Florida Panthers. And we know what Beezer was able to do with them. Laws on the blue line, Fitzgerald up front, now the GM of the New Jersey Devils, Mellenby and Scrudland as well up front. Really good blue-collar squad, right? There were no bad years for Florida. Their first year, they were good. They almost made the playoffs that first year, and then they made it to the Stanley Cup final in year 3. So they did not go through those growing pains until after they got to the final, which I think made it worse. I think it made it worse. I think it probably hurt the market too. They were very good out of the gate, and then they became mediocre for a very long time. Anaheim, on the other hand, picking up Guy Hebert, who is still doing broadcasts with the organization. Ron Tugnutt, one of my personal favorites. Terry Yake, a notable up front. But they went younger. They had 2 bad years, and then they made it to round 2 in year 4. And, of course, of the 2, Anaheim's got a Stanley Cup. Florida has 2 cup appearances. They do not have a Stanley Cup as of yet. Then it was some years later before the Nashville Predators came in, and I'm wearing Preds because it was ugly for them for a while, and I figured, go ugly. Now, the expansion draft wasn't bad. They get Mike Dunham out of New Jersey, good goaltender. Thomas Vokoun out of Montreal, good goaltender. Montreal with a logjam there. Andrew Burnett and Scotty Walker are the notables up front. 2 bad years for Nashville. They didn't make it to round 2 until year 12. Now, they had some mediocre years here and there, but I was looking at, and again, bad years is highly subjective, but I went with my gut on this. I'm like, yeah, there were 2 bad years, and it wasn't that bad. Then you get to Atlanta, and this is where, yeah, things were pretty bad. Atlanta's list of players they were allowed to select was terrible. And again, we don't have a salary cap at that point, so teams didn't care about, dumping off highly paid players to an expansion team. So Trevor Kidd's one of the notables for them. Mark Tenorti, remember when he played for Atlanta? Nope. Terry Yake gets picked up by Atlanta. He had been picked up by Anaheim prior to that. And Steve Staios, who actually I thought his career was all right after he got to Atlanta and beyond. There were 4 bad years for Atlanta, and they didn't make it to round 2 until after the team moved. So Atlanta was bad to mediocre throughout most of their run in Atlanta, minus the 1 year they made the playoffs. And then a year after that, you have Columbus and Minnesota coming in. So this is when the NHL talks about being in expansion mode, this is kind of what they're talking about. You have 5 teams brought in over a 3-year period, and then you have 4 teams brought in over a 3-year period. So at the time Columbus and Minnesota comes in, I mean, you've got fans all over saying there's not enough talent to go around. There's no way this is going to work. Minnesota goes with the younger team. Columbus goes with the older team, picks up a couple of European players as well. Espen Knutson and David Viborny represent. But Minnesota with the younger, they go with McLennan, they go with Hendrickson, Pellerin are 3 examples. And for Columbus, Dwayne Rollison in net. Now, he wouldn't play a game in Columbus, but hey, they picked him up. Lyle Odeline, I almost said Selmar Odeline. Lyle Odeline, Jeff Sanderson, Stephen Hines, and Kevin Dineen are just notables there. So not bad, but there were 6 bad years for Columbus, and they don't make it to round 2 until, by my count, year 18. So, yeah, for a while. Whereas Minnesota, they had 2 bad years, and they made it to the conference finals in year 3. So this is where, if that argument comes up of, hey, I don't think it's fair that, Vegas in only their 6th year. Yeah. Minnesota's in the Final 4 in year 3, and in that Final 4, they met the Anaheim Ducks, and the Ducks go on and lose in the Stanley Cup Final in 2003. But it wasn't really, it's 10 years after they've been brought in, and again, it's 2 of the newer teams against each other. And of course, Florida, Stanley Cup finalists, their 3rd year in the NHL. Now, Vegas comes in, and Seattle comes in after we've got a salary cap. And this is why there's 2 boards to this video. Because I was putting this together, and I thought, this is a nice simplistic look. I want to take a deeper look than that. At the difference between the economics now and the economics of the NHL then. So this is going to be one of the longer videos. So when Vegas comes in, they had teams looking to dump off cap money and teams looking to dump off players, right? And teams wanting to hold on to veterans and dumping younger players. It was a bad time for general managers, and George McPhee just took total advantage. So Riley Smith, Shea Theodore, Alex Tuck, these are guys who were either cap dump, which was Riley Smith's case, or in Theodore and Tuck's case, just, considerations. Don't take these guys, take these guys. And it just backfired on GMs that generally made deals with the Vegas Golden Knights. So February 25th of 2019, Vegas made a trade that had huge implications on what we just witnessed last night with them winning the Stanley Cup. Mark Stone was acquired from Ottawa in exchange for Brandstrom, Lindbergh, and a 2020 second. That's called robbery. If you decided to make a citizen's arrest on George McPhee for that, I think McPhee would look at you and go, that's fair. December 2nd of 2019, they pick up Chandler Stevenson from Washington for a 5th-round draft pick in 2021. I understand that Stevenson, maybe Washington didn't want to pay him. Maybe, he wanted more ice time and they just didn't have room for him. But it still doesn't look great on Washington that they traded Stevenson, right? And it looks great for Vegas. February 19th of 2020, they get Alec Martinez from the LA Kings in exchange for a 2020 second and a 2021 second-round pick. So that's pretty solid trading there, too. And so for the LA Kings, who had won Stanley Cups in 2012 and 2014, they're going through a rebuild. Martinez is older, but Martinez was a key part in the reason that Vegas wins that Stanley Cup. August 29th of 2022, I wanted to use this as an example as well. Adin Hill picked up, and nothing said at the time. Nobody at the time said, well, that's going to put them over. He's going to be their cup-winning goaltender. 2024 fourth round pick is what they gave San Jose in return. For the Sharks, they had 3 NHL level goaltenders, and Hill was the one they decided was the odd man out. They were going to give Kraken in the run, and of course, they already had Reimer. Looking back, would they have rather kept Hill? Probably, I guess. But would Vegas have picked up Kakinen? My guess is probably not. Vegas is very good when it comes to their pro scouts. Any player they pick up usually fits into their lineup and fits in really, really well. So then we get to Seattle. I want to talk about Seattle here. I want to talk about the trades first because the trades are key. Well, there's one trade I want to talk about, and that's acquiring Bjorkstrand July 22nd of last year, 2022, in exchange for a 2023 third and a 2023 fourth round pick. Absolutely worth it. The team makes the playoffs this year, and Bjorkstrand's one of those goal scorers that gave them the depth. But on the free agent market, Ron Francis has done well, including last summer picking up Burakovsky. That was a steal. Of course, he wasn't available for the playoffs. Wenberg, Schwartz, huge pickups for them, and I think it paid dividends this second year. Justin Schultz was a solid pickup on the blue line, fit in right away. Grubauer has had his ups and downs, but he got him past Colorado. So Grubauer, I think, at this point, sticking around. And Donato, another one. So there are definitely some players here that fit in pretty well. Now, if Seattle decides to keep going all in, and if they end up having a run like Vegas, who would hold up the Stanley Cup as Vegas did last night with the Misfits? Well, if there's Kraken Misfits, you'd be looking at Adam Larson. Might end up being the guy who's, there 4 years from now. Jordan Eberle, although there's always trade rumors, but there's always been trade rumors with Eberle. Alexiak's a big physical defenseman and could still be there when that team's ready to win a Stanley Cup. You got Brandon Tanev, fantastic player. Everybody loves Tanev. Vince Dunn has had an absolutely fantastic year for them, and so we'll see what happens with him. Yanni Gourde, 2 Stanley Cups in Tampa. Might he get one in Seattle? And then you've got Jared McCann, 40 goal scorer this year. And so this is where the argument comes in of, well, it's not really fair, but the economics have changed, and I'll point it out on the next board. All right, now this is madness. This is the second board I made up, and this is the board, and I'm going to point out, too, that I used 2 different annuals. This one's the 0506, so when I was looking for items on the 0506 season and when we got the salary cap, because that's really the game changer, I wanted to get into all of the other fun stuff, and that's where I found the image that I posted on the channel on the community page regarding the Toronto Maple Leafs. The amazing phenomenon of the Toronto Maple Leafs, never has a team in professional sports done so little to elicit so much love and hatred. Story by Ken Campbell. So, yeah, just one of those interesting things. But I went through there, and it's got approximations of where teams are spending money. Because 0203, you are looking at... This one's the other one where I was looking at salary cap, and then there was the 0203 where I was looking at how much teams were spending. So alphabetical order from Anaheim through to Washington. The Coyotes are here because they were Phoenix. So Anaheim was spending around the average. $40 million was the average salary in the NHL for your team. They ended up being Stanley Cup finalists that year. They were 11th in the standings. Atlanta was below average. They were spending approximately $25 million on their team. They were 23rd in the standings. So that's a $15 million difference. That is a substantial amount of money difference when you're looking at 25 versus 40. Boston, also around $40 million. They were out in the first round. They were 15th in the standings. For Buffalo, they were below average, approximately $30 million. They were 26th in the standings. Calgary was below average, approximately $30 million. 22nd in the standings. Carolina was 30th in the standings, around average, approximately $40 million there. Chicago was actually above average in their spending, which surprised me a little bit because Chicago was known for being cheap. But above $40 million is what they were spending on theirs. Colorado, obviously, with the team that they had, they were approximately $60 million in their salaries. They were out in the first round. They were 6th overall in the standings, but definitely above average. Columbus was below average. They were 28th in the standings. Approximately $30 million was their salaries. Dallas, above average, above $60 million. They were 2nd in the league, but they were out in the second round that year. They were frustratingly good, well paid, just couldn't get over the hump after that win in 99. Detroit, they were out in the first round, but they were 3rd overall in the standings and approximately $70 million in what they were spending. So again, we come back to Atlanta. That means Detroit spending almost 3 times as much as the Atlanta Thrashers on their team. This is why when people talk about how unfair things are now, where this team's got that player and he's And it doesn't count because LTIR, and I think, yeah, you guys haven't seen an unbalanced league. Edmonton was paying below average, approximately $30 million, but they were 14th in the standings and they were out in the first round. They were a very plucky bunch, those Edmonton Oilers. Always underpaid and always overachieving, it seemed at that point in time. Florida was below average in their pay, a little bit above $30 million. They were 27th in the league, no playoffs there. LA was 17th in the league, barely misses the playoffs. They were around average in their pay, approximately $40 million. The Minnesota Wild were well below average, approximately $20 million, but they had Jacques Lemaire and they were playing the trap. Trap hockey, you didn't need to have the most talented, you just had to have the hardest working, and they were one of the hardest working teams in the league. They did go to the conference final that year, so Minnesota fans, you're welcome. I've got the one season on the board where Minnesota makes it to the Final Four. Montreal in 02-03, they were actually spending approximately $50 million on their salaries, which is above average. Not above expected. We're not in advanced stats territory. I'm just used to saying that. But they were 21st overall in the standings, so no playoffs. Nashville, 24th in the standings, and they were below average in their pay, approximately $25 million. So, again, for Nashville, they just weren't spending the money. New Jersey was. They ended up winning the Cup that year. They were 4th in the standings, and their salaries above $50 million. So, again, spending more than twice what Atlanta was. The Islanders, 2002-2003, they were out in the first round. They were 16th overall, and they were around average in pay of approximately $40 million. The Rangers, they were 19th in the standings, above average, and approximately $70 million. So when we talk about the pre-salary cap era, people will say, well, the Rangers spent all their money and it never helped them. True, because the Rangers did not spend the money wisely. It was something that certain teams did where they just, you're the highest bidder, all right, but they were picking up guys that were older. Free agency at that point wasn't until you were 31 years of age. So if you're spending money on a guy who's 31, 32, and you're spending it till he's 36, 37, yeah, those contracts aren't going to age well. But the Rangers could just go out and add more. And that's kind of what they did. Just keep adding more. The Rangers, honestly, I think the salary cap helped the Rangers because they got better when they weren't able to just go out and spend money for their problems. Ottawa was below average. This will surprise no one, of course, because the Sens have been known to be cheap at times. They were in the conference finals. They were first overall in the standings, but they were spending approximately $30 million on their roster. Philadelphia was above average at approximately $55 million. They were in round 2 that year. They were 5th overall in the standings. For the Coyotes, they were around average, above $40 million, though. So that's the oddity there. They were 20th in the standings. So this is where the Coyotes were still trying to compete. But, of course, not long after, Coyotes, we'd hear about all the losses, and you have to make all the cuts and all that. St. Louis is below Pittsburgh, so we'll do Pittsburgh first. I almost skipped Pittsburgh. Man, 29th overall in the standings, and they were below average in what they were paying. It's a little above $30 million, but this is right around the era where we're hearing about whether or not Pittsburgh might not make it long-term. That they may not be feasible to keep them in Pittsburgh. St. Louis, 02-03, they were out in the first round. They were 8th overall in the standings, and they were spending above $60 million. They also get cited often that this was a team that was spending a lot of money in the pre-cap era, and they did not have success. They had regular season success, not postseason success. San Jose, they were spending above average, nearly $50 million. They were 25th in the standings that year. Kind of surprised to see San Jose spending that much, but again, for San Jose, there were some pretty good high-profile players there. Tampa Bay, they were below average in their spending at nearly $30 million. They actually made it to the second round that year. They were 12th overall in the standings. And then you've got Toronto. You know Toronto spending some money. Approximately $55 million, so not in the Rangers' range. But they were out in the first round. They were 9th overall that year. So definitely spending money, not getting the return on it. Vancouver, 02-03 in the second round. They lost that year. They had a 3-1 series lead on Minnesota. Blew that. That was after they had a 3-1 series comeback against St. Louis. But yeah, they were below average in their pay, above $30 million. I'm guessing that's before the West Coast Express got paid. There were some big paychecks coming to those guys, and rightfully so. Then you have the Washington Capitals rounding this out. 2002-2003, they were 13th in the standings. They were out in the first round, and they were spending above the average at approximately $50 million. So if you take all of this and you just bring it down to the basics, if a team was spending above or below the cap, it definitely affected whether or not they made the playoffs. Above or below average. I'm so used to saying cap. Above average, 8 teams. 8 of the 16 playoff teams were above the average, 3 were at the average, and 5 were below. Then you get below the playoff line. Remember, it's a 30-team league, so there's 14 teams. 4 of them spent more than the average. 3 of them were at the average, and 7 were below. So yes, the teams that spent more generally had more success in the regular season. Sure, in the postseason you had a chance, but I definitely think that New Jersey winning and the fact that they were spending more money than Anaheim did definitely play a role. Anaheim and New Jersey in that final, that was one where all 7 games were won by the home team. But yeah, New Jersey was the better team. They ended up finishing 4th overall in the standings. Anaheim was 11th, and justice was served. As much as at the time I wanted Anaheim to win it, because, Giguère was quite the story. Now, the salary cap this past year was between $60.2 million and $82.5 million. So the kind of discrepancy you see here where the Thrashers are at $25 million and Detroit's at $70 million, the Rangers are at $70 million, that doesn't exist anymore. You can't have that. Now, when the cap was introduced in 2005, that's when the age of free agency was still at 31. I think it was 32 at one point. It would drop to 27, and the owners didn't like it. But when you look at the salary cap and the fact the NHL gets it, the NHLPA also gets the lower age for free agency. That was the trade-off. And it was a trade-off that players in hindsight weren't happy about. There was a lot of bloodshed at the NHLPA when the salary cap came in. That's when Bob Goodnow was gone, I do believe. I believe that was when he stepped away. Because Goodnow had said for years, there will not be a salary cap. We're not doing it. We will not accept a cap. And then they had to. The NHL kept them out for a full year to get it. Now, initially, the salary cap was between $21.5 and $39 million. So it was actually a larger difference between the salary cap minimum and maximum than it is now. It's definitely a tighter number between the lowest and the top. And yet we still hear people talking about, well, this isn't fair because this team has more money. That's always been the case in the NHL. I think that's why they didn't close any loopholes. They talked about it in the last CBA round of negotiations. But for owners who've been around long enough to remember this, they'd think, there's a little bit of an advantage, but compared to what it used to be, it's fine. It's fine. The 2-line pass was also allowed in 05-06, and they finally cracked down on obstruction. One thing that definitely made a big difference to the game was cracking down on all the slashing, the hooking, the holding. Hockey got pretty unwatchable there in the early 2000s. A lot of hitting? Sure, there was a lot of hitting. There was very, very little offense. Very, very little room. And if you were a slow, big, hulking defenseman, you could just grab a guy by the jersey and just kind of hold on. Just like, where do you think you're going, little fella? And just, that was it. So small players couldn't excel. And so if you had the money to spend and you could spend big money on whoever, you had a couple of hulking defensemen, you were a lot tougher to play against. So the game has completely changed. We've got the game's changed economically. The game has changed on every level. And we had teams that before there was the salary cap just happened to be spending a lot less. So expansion, you got the Thrashers are below. You've got Columbus is below average. Minnesota is below average. San Jose goes against type and they're above average. Tampa Bay was below average. Ottawa was below average. Point I'm making is there's Florida below average. Anaheim around average. It's not just that expansion teams came in and they were bad and they were paying their dues. Owners were cheaping out. They were selling out arenas every night and selling you the fan, on the idea of, hey, this team has to be bad. They have to be bad for years. We're going to build up. We're going to get all these draft picks. We're going to build up. And meanwhile, they're filling the buildings. They're making money hand over fist. And then they argued that they weren't. And they got their salary cap a couple years later. So really, in all honesty, I think that it was in part, yes, it was a more brutal system in terms of, your exposed lists were nowhere near what they are now with expansion, but there was more to it than that. And the economics of the NHL have really changed. So you can't have a cheap owner. You couldn't have somebody come in and buy the Seattle Kraken and then say, well, I'm only spending $30 million on the players because I'm going to make tons of money on gate revenue, because the NHL jump in and go, actually the bottom's $60.2 million. So, and Seattle did have cap space that first year. They did not weaponize it that first year. They used it to make their team better in the second year, and it worked. And that's something that, again, the teams that were in the expansion era before that, didn't really think of, using the fact that they were making money to maybe make less money by picking up a player or two here and there, but it was a completely different system. But let me know your thoughts in the comments section below as always. Don't forget to hit like and subscribe if you're browsing your way through. You just happened upon this video. Thank you guys so much for watching, for all your support. I will talk to you again soon.